Hello and welcome to Fordham Global Foresight's Nano-Navigator, the bite-sized version of our regular Navigator series with the London Stock Exchange Group. I'm Jamie White, and today I'm going to talk to Tina Fordham about some key developments in geopolitical risk and their implications. Tina, first of all, what do you think about the latest US Supreme Court decision about Donald Trump's immunity from prosecution?
Thank you, Jamie. I think anybody would be forgiven for not focusing too much on the kind of never-ending series of court decisions. After all, there are dozens of court cases against former President Donald Trump. But in this thicket of legal outcomes, the most recent one from SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, is actually significantly in favor of President Trump, former President Trump, and his prospects for re-election. So I wanted to highlight that because this most recent decision looks at the former president's immunity from prosecution over the allegations of January 6th. And basically, the decision to kick it into the long grass, a tactic which we should all be familiar with, means that there won't be a decision on that front until after the elections, November 5th. So there won't be the headline, the potentially negative headlines that voters would have to contend with. And it's something that will most likely improve his prospects. And at the same time, it has been a way for the Supreme Court to not explicitly rule in the president's favor, but to take a decision on a technicality which buys him time and allows his campaign to continue unimpeded. So score one for former President Donald Trump in the run-up to November 5th. And of course, that's important as we head into Super Tuesday. Non-Americans won't be focused on this. You know about the Super Bowl, of course, in US football, but what's Super Tuesday? Quite simply, it's when the largest number of US states hold their presidential primaries. There will be a lot of media buzz around Super Tuesday, but there's certainly not much mystery about what will emerge. Donald Trump is far and away the favorite. Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina, has fought a good fight, but really has no chance, and it'll be a matter of anointing Donald Trump.
Thank you. And looking away to the Middle East from the States, what's the outlook that you see for the ceasefire, current story on ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, hopes have been high that a ceasefire in Gaza and a potential agreement to release the hostages and to deliver much needed humanitarian aid, chances were better than they have been for some time. Yesterday's incident with an aid convoy and the apparent firing of IDF soldiers on the civilians who'd come to collect the aid has put all of that into question. And so, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think that prospects for a ceasefire and a prisoner exchange remain dim at best. Again, we also link this back into US elections because it has become important, particularly for the left wing of the Democratic Party and for Biden's support, that the perception in that camp is that Biden has been overly supportive of Israel's tactics in Gaza.
Thank you. And again, moving away, another big story recently. What reflections can you share on the recent funeral of Alexei Navalny and the Russian presidential elections?
Yes, well, this year being the biggest year in history for global elections, the Russian elections coming up March 15th to 17th haven't garnered much attention because no one expects there to be a real contest. Vladimir Putin is assured of his next term. And with that in mind, the very likely political assassination of Alexei Navalny, who had been incarcerated in a Siberian prison for the last 3 years, felt like a shock really, even though it shouldn't have. Putin does not allow his challengers to survive. But the timing and the authorities' eventual willingness to allow a funeral to take place in Moscow has highlighted that even in death, Alexei Navalny is able to draw quite large crowds. And this is despite the fact that all of the people attending and standing on the side of the road as his hearse drove past throwing flowers will have been observed by the security services. And it's an environment in Russia where simply standing with a blank sheet of paper is putting people in prison. So this is not an outcome that Vladimir Putin would have wanted. I wrote in last week's newsletter for clients about Putin's deep-seated envy and hatred of Navalny, who was young and handsome and ran almost as a US-style politician. He was also tall, something that Putin is not. And now he's dead. And I think for many Russians, their hopes of a post-Putin future have gone along with it. So, what are the options? There aren't going to be any other challengers on the ballot for Russians to vote for. But remember that even in autocracies, the legitimacy of these staged elections matters. And so the Kremlin will have been hoping for the largest turnout ever and for a very high level of public support for Putin, not kind of Belarusian 95% high, but that stamp of approval. And they're less likely to get it. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, another Kremlin challenger living outside of the country, has suggested that Russians write in Alexei Navalny's name as a write-in candidate. This kind of thing will be annoying. It won't change the outcome, but it really underscores a couple of things, I think, about Russia. We had protesters for the first time out in the street, or rather they were mourners. Navalny's supporters were careful to say that this is not a protest march, but they were shouting slogans like "No war" and "Putin is a killer." So this was not what he was looking for in the run-up to these elections.
And there are three diverse subjects, certainly, but do you think there's a common thread or anything? Is there a theme that could link any of these developments?
I think there definitely is, and it links back to our PQ framework, the idea that we need to raise our political quotient rather than necessarily become an expert in all of these three areas, right? US elections, Middle Eastern politics, and Russian politics. These are things that I've been studying for 25 years and spend a great deal of time looking at, but they come together in one important way, and that is the overarching drive of leaders for political survival. Putin and Netanyahu in Israel are both engaged in conflicts which are taking place with a great deal of global scrutiny and not without domestic opposition as well. But their political survival is at the forefront. For Netanyahu, an end to the operation in Gaza would very likely lead to calls for new elections and challenge his hold on power. Putin has been ruling unopposed for a great deal of time now, but he couldn't even allow a political challenger who, again, was many time zones away in Siberia just to continue to be alive, let alone come back to challenge him in an election. And so for leaders in place, staying where they are, staying in the seat of power, maintaining the throne with all of the things that comes with it, such as immunity from prosecution and the ability to maintain their networks and their gains, is really paramount. And that has knock-on effects for the rules of the game, for the business environment, and it means that, among other things, it's much more difficult for observers to game out, to anticipate what might happen next.
Tina, that's great. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thanks to you for watching the Nano-Navigator. Don't forget to join us for the next edition of the Navigator with the London Stock Exchange Group on the 15th of March. Thank you and goodbye.